From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up from the ongoing Risk and Profit Conference today at K-State, Dan O'Brien will talk about the growing expectation that there will be still fewer acres planted to winter wheat in Kansas this fall. And he'll offer his thoughts on the weather threats to corn and soybeans in leading production states and the chances that the markets will eventually rally if those production numbers go down. Then from the Kansas Wheat Alliance, based at K-State, Daryl Strouts will outline the production traits of the 3 new K-State-bred wheat varieties now available to you growers for planting this fall. And K-State's Mary Knapp will report on Kansas agricultural weather and will pass along the latest on the expected conditions for Monday's solar eclipse. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Our first segment originating from the 2017 Risk and Profit Conference here at K-State, hosted by the Agricultural Economics Department, as we've been telling you about. And later on today, the grain outlook will be covered in quite some detail by our guest, who's along with us every Friday, Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. And our conversation here, Dan, will be more or less a preview of what you'll be sharing here in just a few moments at Risk and Profit. But what is going to be the general tone of what you pass along in your presentation?
I think that the information being rested upon right now in the grain markets is generally pretty cautious to negative. That said, still, you look at individual parts of these sets of supply-demand assumptions for corn, grain, sorghum, wheat, and soybeans, and the game isn't over yet. Particularly, you look at something like corn. The assumptions that went into the 169, just under 170 bushel per acre yield projection by USDA NASS were resting on the information they knew as of August 1. It was still ongoing consensus that ear weights in their calculations were a question. Really not a lot of accounting for abandoned acres and earlier problems. It was kind of incredulously responded to by people is the number we had on August 1, and now as we've seen expanding dryness in some pretty important production areas. Now, large parts of Iowa move towards matching the dryness that we've seen up in North, South Dakota, part of Nebraska, and on into Montana. When you see all that, still leaves room for reduction yet in those yield numbers. Still awfully hard to reconcile, the strong opinion that we were somewhere 167, 165, 168 for yields, and to have that high number come in. I've been at a meeting here within the last week. I've talked to USDA NASS representatives, and again, they explain very carefully what they consider at this time here in August for yield information to come up with that corn yield, and there's room still for adjustment. That said, the biggest adjustment, one thing I'll talk about here later today, is if you look at since year 2000, the biggest adjustment that we've seen to the downside from the August crop report to the final numbers has been there was 1 year we dropped 12 bushels, next year 5, and most adjustments in regular years are more like 2, 3, 4 bushels at the most. So for us to have a major move to go from just under 170 to 165 is getting towards the largest move that you would have seen.
It's not unprecedented. It's just out of the norm.
It's not unprecedented, and probably the thing that's still the biggest wild card out there, I think, is the expansion of these dry areas off into Iowa and some other lingering late production, late planting problems in other parts of the Corn Belt.
And a lot of the same could be said for the soybean complex and concerns about how that crop will finish, especially once again in Iowa, you say.
Yeah, really, of course, Iowa's huge production state for soybeans, but with the growth of row crops up in the Dakotas, it's pretty large up there too. Again, we're sitting here in August and see generally decent weather in most places except in these extreme drought areas. So it's kind of I wouldn't call it an ambivalence about the whole thing, but hard to figure where that soybean number will go. I really do think, though, that we'll have more information. We'll have gotten through flowering. We'll really have I guess I'd place more credence now in that September number than that August number. Again, we have to get through August to see how the flowering and these other reproductive periods get. That said, man, we're shooting at about 4.3 billion bushels of soybeans. If anything's a surprise in all those USDA numbers that came out is their optimism on exports. That sounds like I'm a real downer, Eric, not trying to be, but in so many of those use categories, even with large South American crops, especially for soybeans, there's anticipation that our exports this coming year will be just as good next year as this. And, there's a lot that will have to play out in terms of what our world competitors actually have happened to them before we get past, well, we haven't even harvested the 2017 crops, but to get past the first of the year next year and see what happens in South America, et cetera, et cetera.
And the bar is being set pretty high for our bean exports at present.
Well, yeah, right now we have scenarios in place, low prices, strong usage, which is tremendous. We need strong usage to move through these stockpiles, but even at the levels we have, I think you have to be somewhat cautious to look at the projections USDA has put out for such strong usage in a number of these areas. One thing I would say, I'm giving thought to this, and working with other colleagues in the university land-grant system, there's kind of a consensus emerging that probably looking at lower wheat acres again next year. And that decision is going to be made for winter wheat in Kansas coming up September, October.
And there are rumblings out in the countryside to that effect here in Kansas.
I'd be nothing if not a two-handed economist. On the one hand, you've got the things that would drive it down, and they're right out there. Lack of profitability from low prices, and this burgeoning wheat streak mosaic issue that we have. That's not encouraging anybody to plant more wheat, at least marginally, to lower it. But on the other side, the other issue that's burgeoning is like a cash flow problem, working capital problem, to be technical about it. And if people are short of cash, then the lowest cost crop we can plant that's harvested the fastest is winter wheat, planted this October for not as much as some of the competitive crops you'd be considering. Planted in September, October of this year, harvested July. You could sell that, turn it to cash, potentially quicker than the other crops you're waiting until October, November in some cases to harvest. And cash flow needs could come in and mitigate some of these other negative factors in terms of U.S. wheat acres. Would not be surprised to see corn acres move higher next year, some thinking as much as 3 million acres higher. If we're going higher on corn acres and lower on wheat, then in the difference you probably have soybean acres moving, not all of 3 million, but more like 2, or somewhere in the middle of that to the other side. And it's not that corn's doing great on its own, but there's just enough pessimism about how a large South American crop, 4.3 billion bushels soybean crop, how that'll affect prices this fall for beans.
You're talking up the likelihood of wide basis at harvest as per your presentation.
Yes, where does wide basis come from? Large inventories and storage problems. Maybe the thing that will be good out of this conference to talk to people about will be how our financial issues, our tight cash flows that have been building from 2015-16, and if we have low prices again and now 2017, how our tight cash flow positions for a good proportion of our farmers could drive them to sell cash quicker when as soon as they get it, to alleviate some of these financial issues, much less have people in the financial community encourage them to do that. And if that happens, then you create sharper harvest lows, wider basis, and maybe, hopefully, a better recovery after that because you'll have washed the prices out some. But to the degree we have financial issues coming affecting cash flows, could make cash marketing's sharper and quantity-wise heading off into fall and would be surely a negative drag on prices.
Well, it's hardly a glowing overall outlook, but reality is reality.
Yeah, I just talked about all that name. That's the possibility of what could occur. And each one of these commodities, there's some things to still consider. On the feed grain side, that number is interpreted very negatively for corn, grain, sorghum. If you were thinking judiciously, you'd think that number is probably going to come down in terms of the U.S. corn, grain, sorghum yield figures, and at both yield and acres. So things may not look as bad from just a supply-demand balance point of view as now, and we still have that, what's going to happen in Iowa. For soybeans, there's still some uncertainty there. Actually, there's some quiet positive news in long-term building for soybeans. And it's not just China that's buying soybeans, has strong demand. A lot of those Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, Thailand, etc., they're all growing in their demand. So it's not only China that's building a demand base. So I hope, like everything, that I'm wrong. I'm being so pessimistic about soybeans. For wheat, the issue with wheat is, and you read the market reports, we're paying attention to the large aggregate, and people say, oh my gosh, we have more wheat than we've ever had. But in this report, the disparity between that aggregate point of view and the one that takes China out of the picture and sees where we're at could not be more stark. It's getting worse, and that we now have at least as tight of a non-China world wheat supply-demand situation as we had since 2012 when we were setting record high prices. From talking with my colleagues in the Dakotas, now they're just starting to see with their tight spring wheat crop situation where when people come into that market looking to buy hard red spring wheat, that they can't find what they want, so they're getting skittish. So, and that's what you'll have to see. I think you'll have to see the cash market lead the futures up, because the futures are all focused on this aggregate, whereas the cash market, the real market, has to live and die in terms of what they can actually find. And if they can't find what they need, then they have to bid up.
Well, that's a great warm-up for your presentation later on this morning, Dan. And thanks for the comments, as always.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Once more, his full grain market outlook will be presented later on this morning at the Risk and Profit Conference here at Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today. And now to formally introduce to you the 3 new winter wheat varieties that will be available to you Kansas growers this fall and coming through the auspices of the Kansas Wheat Alliance, of which K-State is a part. Joining us now, the president of that alliance, Daryl Strouts, to outline the attributes of these 3 new wheats. They've been in the pipeline. Producers, Daryl, have been anticipating them for a time. They're now here. But before we talk of the trio, your take on the availability of wheat seed in general as we get into fall planting soon, coming off of a year where there were spots that wheat was a little thin, to put it that way.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I mean, in general, through the central core of the state, yields are pretty good, but once you get out west with wheat streak mosaic, really affecting yields and things like that, that could affect availability of certain varieties. And northwest Kansas has gone through a lot of hail this last year too, and so that definitely affected some seed production and availability in that area. And so, I think anytime you talk about new varieties, they're going to be popular, and then other varieties that have been out for a while that are popular. Producers just need to get that order in early if they want, one of those new or popular varieties, because those are the ones that go quick. That's why they're popular.
So if you haven't placed your order or moved in that direction by now, you best be doing so right away.
Yeah, certainly so. There's always going to be some seed of something around, but again, if producers are looking for specific varieties, they need to get that ordered soon.
Well, The K-State developed varieties are now ready for duty in Kansas, and the three of them are addressing production challenges in various regions of Kansas, right?
That's right. It's the first time that I can ever remember that we've got three new varieties coming out at once, and I think it's really great that they cover really the whole state, different ones in different areas for different things. So the one that we have for out west is Tatanka, and it's going to be a kind of what I call a good low-input variety. It's got a lot of good leaf health package built into it. It's going to be great for guys on dry land that maybe don't want to put a lot of inputs into it. But for those that do want to, kick up the nitrogen or manage it a little better, it'll reward them for that too. Mm-hmm. One of the concerns that we have about Tatanka would be straw strength. And so you start getting up around that 80 bushel an acre range. That's one that it'll make 80, but it'll probably, go down and lodge a little bit when that happens. And so we really think it's probably best suited for dry land production, or you want to leave some straw behind for catching the winter snow. And certainly if you're going to have a variety for western Kansas, you've got to have good drought tolerance. And it has that too.
And disease resistance?
Yep, leaf rust and stripe rust resistance is good on that. Oddly enough, it comes out of the haste program when we don't normally see soil-borne mosaic resistance from those varieties, but this is one that does have pretty good soil-borne mosaic resistance and even some acid soil tolerance. So it has the potential of actually coming into central Kansas, and I've seen it do quite well there. But again, with that much moisture and the chance that it might lodge, I think it's really better suited for dryland production in western Kansas.
But its promise is pretty strong for the western part of the state.
It is, yeah. It's going to be a really good, red wheat variety for western Kansas, one we've been looking for a long time.
There's another of the three. It's been named Larry. This is after longtime K-State wheat breeding technician Larry Patton, recognizing his contributions over the years. And where is it best suited, Daryl?
So Larry looks to be a good fit for really the southern part of the state, from south central into southwest, and then down into Oklahoma as well. It has really good stripe rust resistance, and that's been a problem for us for a number of years. The unique thing about Larry is it's a good tillering variety, and it has really high yield potential. So for producers that are really willing to manage their wheat, really push it to the maximum, Larry would be a great variety for them. It does need a fungicide, used on it, but I think we see, especially with the low cost of the generic fungicides, a lot of the producers are using those as part of their regular practice, and certainly Larry is one that would benefit from that. It has a little bit of a weakness for leaf rust, and the fungicide would help cover that. It's really kind of our racehorse variety, the one that you want to take really good care of, and it's really going to get you in the winner's circle in the end.
And one of the attributes of this variety, Larry, is that it can take acidic soils more so than some other varieties might.
That's right. It's really well adapted to those low pH soils that we have down in south central Kansas and down into Oklahoma. It also has a good degree of drought tolerance, so that'll help it move out west if guys want to use it under dry land or kind of marginal moisture conditions out there too. It'll hold its height pretty well and give them some straw if that's what they're looking for.
All right. And the third of the three, well, it's being touted as the eventual replacement for what has been 5 years running now, the widest planted wheat in Kansas, Everest. This one's called Zenda.
That's right. This one's called Zenda. Zenda is, with its parentage being from Everest, it's a lot like Everest. With Zenda, we get back some of those things that we've lost in Everest, mostly being stripe rust resistance. So it's got good stripe rust resistance, good leaf rust resistance. It has the fusarium head blight or scab tolerance like Everest has. In fact, it's probably just as good as Everest or very close to Everest in that regard. And so that makes Everest and Zenda number 1 and 2 when you're looking at scab resistance, which is important for anybody that's planting after corn, or I kind of think even if you're planting near corn, that it's probably a good idea to have that in. And then it's also got barley yellow dwarf resistance that we see in Everest as well. We get all those things that we'd really like to have, and in addition to that, we get better quality and better yield than Everest. So Zenda's been a good variety, at least in our plots that we've looked at. It's been pretty strong through the central corridor of the state, kind of north to south. I think we'll see it clear up into southern Nebraska and even down into north central Oklahoma, right there through the center part of the state.
And further east into Kansas.
Certainly
as well.
Eastern Kansas. Any place that's growing Everest, it'll be a great replacement for that, on corn ground. It's got really good yield potential. I kind of look at Zenda as a sort of an easy management variety with its leaf health and everything. If you want to use a fungicide, you can. It might benefit from that. But it gives you this bigger window of time to really get in there and do something if you're going to do that. Other varieties are pretty critical. That window's pretty small.
And one more thing, and you hinted at it, the quality factor, baking quality is what you're getting at there. It has a leg up on Everest and other varieties.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, there's no secret to the fact that we've seen some lower proteins out there, for the last couple of years that it's kind of affected quality in some areas, and it's probably affecting the basis in some areas because there's a high degree of these varieties that don't have quite the quality that the millers and particularly the bakers are looking for. And so Zenda really doesn't get us to that highest mark for quality, but it certainly gives us a step up over a lot of them that are out there.
Very well. So again, the three, Tatanka for western Kansas, Zenda for central and eastern Kansas, and Larry for the southern reaches of the state. Generally speaking now, Daryl, your standard advice to producers as they would take on a new variety, and what would be the level of commitment to that variety that you would recommend right out the chute?
Well, I think for any of these varieties, and I don't even think it has to be limited to just, the new ones that we've got here today. I think any new variety that the producer's looking at, it probably doesn't merit going in whole hog. I think maybe up to 10% of your acres or maybe even 25% in some cases. Zenda would be a good example where it's going to be a lot like Everest. There's probably not going to be any surprises with it that way for producers that are growing Everest and they want to switch to something newer, better. Zenda would be an easy replacement. This year, it's probably going to be more dictated by seed availability on new varieties just because they typically don't have as much as the older varieties, and that may limit how much seed, some producers can get their hands on.
That all said, though, this is the next wave of varieties to be available to Kansas producers. So we're turning a page, if you will, are we not, in advancing the potential of our wheats?
We are, but to be honest, the pages are coming pretty fast now. There's more in the pipeline right behind these, and I think that's going to be a big thing for producers is the sheer number of varieties out there to choose from and getting good information. And so just remind everybody that the K-State wheat performance tests are available. It's a good resource to go to. Also talk to your certified seed producers, ask them what they've got experience with, because many of them will have had these varieties, at least for a year of seed production this last year, but maybe in some of their local trials for a couple of years. And they'll have a good handle on what varieties work well and under what conditions they work well. One of the things I'm beginning to see now is that we've got a lot of good varieties out there, but it really depends on how you manage it to get that right variety on that right piece of ground and to manage it correctly to really get the most out of it.
And you said it, the performance of these three wheats fully captured in K-State's wheat variety performance tests in the 2017 edition is finished up, and you can have a look at that information at the agronomy website here at K-State, among other places. Very exciting. And lastly, any timeline as to when the next round of releases is due?
We could see a couple next year. I'm really excited about, all the things that come out of K-State. But as I look at the things coming out of the Fort Hays program in particular, everything I see coming has the WSM2 gene for wheat streak mosaic resistance, which is something, we can't get soon enough. And it's good to see that that's going to be kind of just a standard thing coming out of that program now.
Very well. Looking forward to that day. But for here and now, producers, check out these three new wheats that are being released out of the K-State program and through the Kansas Wheat Alliance, available in certified seed this fall. Daryl, thanks for the word on these.
Thanks for letting me be here.
He's the president of the Kansas Wheat Alliance, Daryl Strouts. And ask your local Extension agricultural agent as well about the promise of whichever of these three would seem to suit your growing conditions the best, producers, as we roll into another fall planting season for winter wheat in Kansas. You're listening to Agriculture Today. More after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You are tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Now to today's agricultural news headlines in brief, these courtesy in part of DTN. The White House announced yesterday that Argentina has agreed to accept U.S. pork products for the first time since 1992. That announcement comes after a meeting between Vice President Mike Pence and Argentine President Mauricio Macri. And it's a small prospective market at the moment, but Argentina has a de facto ban, has had, that is, on U.S. pork products for 25 years because of unscientific mitigation requirements and other sanitary issues not based on science, as the National Pork Producers Council states it. The NPPC had hoped since Marcy was elected in late 2015 that his pro-trade stance would open up the door to U.S. pork. Argentina has a population of 41 million and higher per capita income than Mexico. Under terms of the agreement, all fresh, chilled, and frozen pork products from the U.S. will be eligible for export. The White House stated the agreement opens up a potential $10 million a year market, and an economist for the U.S. Meat Export Federation, Aaron Bohr, said the $10 million estimate is, in fact, realistic. Meantime, South Korea is once again allowing U.S. poultry products to enter that country, including the entry of U.S. eggs duty-free. More on that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
When the U.S. reports an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza,
some countries just automatically impose countrywide restrictions.
Restrictions on all U.S. poultry imports. Dr. Jack Scheer is chief veterinarian with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Last spring, when avian influenza was discovered in Tennessee, one of the countries that did impose a total ban on all U.S. poultry was South Korea. And now, days after the U.S. announced it was totally and officially free of the virus, South Korea has announced it's lifting its ban. Dr. Scheer told us that the U.S. has gotten many countries to agree to only ban poultry imports from areas of the U.S. where the outbreaks occur. And for South Korea,
we'll continue to negotiate with them to regionalize every time we have one of these virus outbreaks.
South Korea had a bad one last fall. They had to destroy over 30 million chickens. Most were egg-laying hens, causing an egg shortage there. And so, also, South Korea has said it will temporarily allow U.S. egg and egg products into the country duty-free to try to alleviate that egg shortage. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Closer to home, Kansas State University scientists have studied now 30 years of sorghum production here in Kansas. They've now concluded that the crop needs to exploit greater genetic diversity to handle heat stress should average temperatures rise in the future. According to an associate professor of agronomy and one of the study's co-authors, Krishna Jagadish, we've not invested enough in the breeding pipeline, as he put it. Their work, which is being published this week in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, signals a critical need for the public and private research communities to capitalize on sorghum's genetic diversity to develop the type of commercial hybrids needed to handle future temperature increases. K-State agricultural economist Jesse Tack helped analyze sorghum yield data in this study from 408 commercial hybrids grown in 11 Kansas locations between the years 1985 and 2014. He says that farming systems need tools to combat extreme weather exposure, and that adding additional heat resilience to drought-hardy sorghum could be the right tool. This is Agriculture Today. A highly accomplished student from Northwest Kansas who has developed a passion for agriculture in recent years has now been awarded a prestigious scholarship from the Kansas wheat industry. Marsha Boswell tells her story on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marsha?
A history of leadership, service, and academic excellence led Cassidy Cray of Sharon Springs to be selected as the recipient of the 2017 Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship, awarded by the Kansas Wheat Growers Research Foundation. The scholarship will award Cray $500 toward her enrollment at Kansas State University, where she will pursue a degree in milling science. Cassidy Cray has not always been involved with agriculture. Her interest was sparked when she was introduced to it by family friends. She says, "I've worked for a family farm, and they really helped me get involved with agriculture. My parents grew up on farms, but they did not stay involved." When she was first introduced to production agriculture, she was on the edge about the idea. Ever since her first day helping out on a farm, she no longer has any doubts. She says, "This is my summer job, and during the school year, I help on weekends. It really interested me the more I went out there." A couple of reasons Cray says she was unsure about farming was how intimidating the big equipment was and the endless amount of a whole new world to learn. Cray attended Wallace County High School in Sharon Springs and is attending Kansas State University this fall to study milling science. Cray plans to rush and hopefully join a sorority and become involved with College of Agriculture clubs that are on campus. Cray says she became interested in milling science through some of her friends. Last fall, she toured the mill and the agriculture department and immediately fell in love. Cray says, "I plan on joining some agriculture clubs in the fall to also spark my knowledge and interest in other areas of agriculture." According to Jordan Hildebrand, program assistant at Kansas Wheat, Cassidy's passions for her community and agriculture have made her an excellent recipient of the scholarship. Hildebrand says, "We're proud to encourage high school students like Cassidy to pursue a career in the wheat industry." The Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship is given to high school seniors who are pursuing a degree in agriculture. The scholarship first began in 2009 to honor Herb Clutter's influential role in organizing leadership groups on behalf of Kansas wheat producers and is administered by the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Hildebrand says Mr. Clutter's enthusiasm and leadership in the wheat industry serves as an excellent example for young adults as they take this next step in their lives. "We are honored to offer a scholarship in remembrance of Herb Clutter and to share his passion for the industry and his community with future generations of wheat leaders." The $500 scholarship goes to offset tuition to a college or university-bound incoming freshman from Kansas. The students are chosen by their achievement, leadership qualities, and career objectives in the field of agriculture. To learn more about the Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship, please go to kansaswheat.org/clutter. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marsha Boswell.
Thanks, Marsha. And quickly, a reminder about two big K-State crop field days coming up next week. On Wednesday, the 23rd, the Agricultural Research Center at Hayes will host its row crop roundup starting at 9 o'clock that morning. And then Thursday, the 24th, the Southwest Research and Extension Center at Garden City with its fall field day. That'll get going with registration around 8 o'clock. Details at agronomy.ksu.edu. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever wondered why livestock producers burn Kansas pasture? Here's the deal. Controlled burning helps preserve the prairie and allows every bite feeder cattle eat to be the most nutritious. National Wildlife and Parks also feel it is a necessity to help with wildlife populations.
So the next time you see a Kansas pasture burning, know it's for the good of our wildlife, our prairie, and our livestock. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Next up on this Agriculture Today, Kansas agricultural weather. And as you might anticipate, we will feature the outlook for Eclipse Day this coming Monday. More on that in a moment. Mary Knapp is alongside once again, research and extension climatologist at K-State. Before we talk eclipse and how readily we'll be able to observe this phenomenon, Mary, let's look back at the week. It was a wet one, you say?
It was a wet one, not as wet as the week before. We should note that our week is the week that goes into the U.S. Drought Monitor, which ends on Tuesday. We averaged 0.8 of an inch of precip, which is 105% of normal statewide. As is typical, it wasn't evenly distributed. The winning divisions were those along the Kansas-Oklahoma border, the southern divisions. Southeast had the most. They averaged 1.59 inches, which was just a shade over 2 times what they would normally see during the week. South Central and Southwest divisions also averaged above an inch of moisture, and that was more than they would normally see during the week as well. That allowed for a trimming of the abnormally dry conditions on the southern stretches. We still, in the latest drought monitor, have abnormally dry across parts of the state, and we still have moderate drought in parts of the central and north central areas. That has not changed. They did see rain in that area, but not enough to make significant improvements in it.
And it was, again, an unseasonably cool week as our norm goes in Kansas.
Again, yes, cooler than normal for the week. We did break the century mark, but 99 up in north central Kansas in Osborne County, and just next door in Jewell County, they had the low for the week of 54. So very indicative of the drier conditions there, where you can have those temperatures spike and then they will drop down more readily. When you have the more humid air, that tends to keep those temperatures elevated at night. On Tuesday, we were seeing warmer than normal conditions for the date, particularly here in the eastern part of the state. But most of that was because the nighttime low temperatures stayed elevated with that very humid air in advance of that storm system.
All right. Well, perhaps never has there been, Mary, more universal interest in a 3-hour weather forecast than there is for this coming Monday's eclipse event. And we want to pass along what we know to the moment about the visibility of the eclipse and whether or not the weather is going to cooperate. What is the general drift at the moment?
At the moment, the general forecast, particularly in the area where the totality is expected, which is in northeastern Kansas, is that there will be between 60 and 30% cloud cover during that 1 to 3 in the afternoon period. Keep in mind that doesn't mean the sun will be totally obscured or even obscured at all. Think about the sky conditions that we had on Wednesday of this week. We had about a 60% sky cover, but these were cumulus clouds that were gathering on different parts of the horizon. At noon into about 1:30, the sun was completely visible. So if we had a pattern like that, while it wouldn't be quite as nice as having totally clear skies, it would still allow for a very good view of the eclipse. We should note also that all of Kansas will see at least a partial eclipse, and the area that's going to see the least percent cover will be down in the extreme southwestern parts of the state. Elkhart will be about 89% of totality. In the Manhattan area, we fall between the 99 and 98% total coverage. Again, you can go online. There are lots of maps that show where your particular part of the state will fall in that range of visibility.
And just as a footnote, the eclipse starts to develop late morning on Monday, and the sun then will clear sometime 2 o'clock or after.
Right. That's basically starts about 11:45 to noon is when the moon shadow begins to drift over the face of the sun. In the northeastern part, Hiawatha totality is expected to start around 1:06 p.m. and be over by 1:08. It's about 2 minutes and 30 seconds of totality, and then clear by 2:30, 2:38, something like that. So again, a fairly long event to watch.
And we might note as well, the Weather Data Library here at K-State launched its Eclipse page. It's live and operational now. What do you have there of interest, Mary?
Well, what we have there is we have links to 6 of our stations that are near the path of totality. The one that will probably be of most interest is the Hiawatha station, which falls right on the line of totality. What we're showing is 1 minute temperature and solar radiation data, and you can track that. On a clear day like today, you can see how much you should expect. As we get to the eclipse event, you'll be able to see the impact of clouds as they drift across the sun and obscure that, see the jagged line for that particular thing. So again, you can check it out on the day of the event. The other thing that we'll be doing with this is after the event is over, we'll have an archive of all the 1 minute data, not just the solar radiation and temperature, but the humidities, barometric pressure, winds, And that will be available if you are interested in seeing how that fared, or if you wanted to compare between sites, see how Hiawatha compares with Washington, which is in about a 98% range. So you can look at that.
Be sure to check that out. It's at ksu.edu/mesonet, MESONET, ksu.edu/mesonet. And very briefly here, Mary, the September forecast has been posted. What does it tell us?
Basically, it's calling for a continuation of the wetter than normal conditions across most of the state, particularly the central and eastern area, with normal precipitation along the western boundaries. The other interesting thing is the outlook is for cooler than normal temperatures statewide, and it's kind of a bullseye in the central plains of cooler temperatures.
Well, all the best as you and your team head to northeast Kansas on Monday to gather all that you will be pulling in on the eclipse event. Looking forward to seeing that online later on, Mary.
Thanks, Eric.
She's Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension climatologist. Our time's away for today. We thank you for being along with us as well, and do enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.